Hello and welcome back to the Just Girl Yapping podcast. Now you might notice that some things have changed. I moved my room around because I got bored. So I currently don't have anywhere to put my mic arm thing. So I'm holding it currently, and that's what we're going to be doing today. I'm just going to jump right in today. I don't have anything to complain about, so that's a miracle. Today I'm going to be talking about the difference between men and women when involved in spirituality. So the witch versus wizard debate, and then some historical examples too, if you don't believe me. So first of all, when you look at the words witch and wizard semantically, they have very different meanings and they conjure up a very different idea in your mind of the sort of person that you're talking about. So for example, a wizard, like Merlin, Gandalf, Dumbledore. Old men with long beards who are very wise and all this stuff. And they're usually respected, wise, maybe eccentric, but it doesn't really put you off them that much. That just makes them interesting. And they're usually old and they're able to age gracefully into their wisdom, and them being old is a positive trait because it means that they've lived through things. Whereas a witch, you think of the wicked witch, like Hansel and Gretel's witch who tries to eat them and like cook them and stuff, or like Baba Yaga, it's not good. And they usually don't have a name. They're just the witch or like a hag or something like that. They're usually ugly, dangerous, and crazy. They're usually old, which obviously means that they can't be pretty or desirable. So they have to be ugly and scary and the kind of bad thing in the story, which is also the same reason that villains, if they're female, are usually ugly. And this is because women age out of their beauty and can't just be wise. They're bumbling and crazy and, evil and stuff. So in modern culture, when we move away from the traditional Christian side of religion and we look at paganism, Wicca, or even Hellenistic polytheism, women who practice are often seen as the hippie woo-woo or crazy, or it's assumed that they're making love spells or making potions with their period blood or something like that. And a man in this same situation would be seen as interesting, maybe even someone who could be the leader of a movement or a teacher, and they're seen as wise, interesting, and even desirable. A woman who practices witchcraft, specifically if we're talking about Etsy witches or TikTok tarot readings or things like that, they can also be put into the manic pixie dream girl category, because some, if they are conventionally attractive, are viewed by men as interesting and whimsical. They often also fall into alternative clothing aesthetics and subcultures like goth or twee, aesthetics which often draw in certain types of men who, we all know the meme that's I want a goth girlfriend with thick thighs or whatever, and it's kind of fetishized, and that usually has ties to witchcraft, and men find that desirable and fun, but are also not scared of it, but they don't understand it, and they're not willing to. They just think it's, that's so funny, Also, women who have crystals or things like that, who practice the more base kinds of witchcraft, are often seen as weird or basic. But if a man were to carry crystals, then he would be seen as interesting or in touch, or, oh my god, that's so modern. I want to draw attention to a historical comparison, and that is of Joseph Smith and Joan of Arc. Now, obviously, very different people. They're about 200 years apart, but that doesn't really matter because it's still the same today. So, Joseph Smith lived from 1805 to 1844. In 1820, around 15 years old, he experienced his first vision where God and Jesus appeared to him and told him that every other religion and existing churches were corrupt. In 1823, around 18 years old, he was visited by an angel who revealed to him golden plates buried in a hillside, which were then translated into the Book of Mormon, which was published in 1830, becoming the foundation of the Latter-day Saint movement. He faced persecution from outsiders of the religion, but within his movement, he was revered as a prophet. He was killed for his beliefs, but inside of his movement, he still remains a figurehead, and he created this whole movement. Yes. Yes. Joan of Arc lived from 1412 to 1431. She began hearing voices in 1425 at around 13 years old, which she identified as saints who instructed her to support Charles VII and help drive the English out of France during the 100 Years' War. In 1429, at around 17 years old, she convinced Charles VII of her divine mission. In 1430, at around 18 years old, she was captured by allies of the English and tried by a church court under charges of heresy, cross-dressing, and witchcraft. She was burned at the stake in 1431 at around 19 years old and wasn't named a saint until 1920 by the Roman Catholic Church. That's nearly 500 years after her death, by the way, if anyone wants to not have to do the maths. So the same visions and voices that both were hearing ended up in completely different ways. Obviously Joan of Arc is remembered now, but at the time, that was crazy. You're a witch. And if we're talking about the witch trials, I'm sure a lot of people know this, but the craziest thing about that was that I know that specifically they did this in England. I don't know about America because I'm not up to date. Not up to date? That's crazy. It's not still going on. Well, you could say it is. I'm not up to date on my Salem history. But they would try women as witches and throw them into a body of water. And if they sank and drowned, then they were innocent. But if they floated, then they were a witch. So if they lived, they would be called a witch and killed anyway. And if they drowned, then they were innocent, but they were dead anyway. But yeah, even in more modern religions, women are usually seen as subordinate and usually hold, if any position in the church, a lower position. And a man is usually a priest or a prophet or things like that. But women don't tend to be prophets, they tend to be crazy. The way society labels spiritual men and women isn't about their practice, it's about gendered power. Today, women reclaim the witch archetype as empowerment, intuition, and rebellion, whereas men still largely benefit from social assumptions of credibility and leadership in spiritual spaces. Why is it that men are called wise and women are called crazy? And it is just proof that misogyny makes its way into every aspect of our lives. We know that religion has been seen as misogynistic, but are we really thinking about the non-traditional types of religion too? Or even your fairy tale witches and wizards. One place that isn't entirely the same, I will say, is Harry Potter. Not to praise J.K. Rowling too much, because there are a lot of other aspects that are misogynistic in these books and in these movies. Witches and wizards are portrayed quite well next to each other. And that's all I'll say on the matter, because I don't want to talk about J.K. Rowling. I'd love to have a discussion about this. If you have any thoughts about this, then put it in the comments. And I'm going to put some helpful or interesting articles in the description or some extra thoughts and things like that. And I will see you next time. Bye!